Connect Run Club Podcast, episode 93. Jim Vance, Run with Power. Hey, welcome back, runners, to the podcast, episode number 93. We are so excited to talk about running with power today, and also excited to have my cohort here sitting with me on a hot summer day. Episode 93, temperature probably 96 or something today.
It's way too hot. I'm not running with any power.
You're not running with power at all?
Too hot to run with power.
I understand. I'm running for survival right now.
That should be, we should have an episode like that. We should get the guys on that did the zombie run app. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
We run away from zombies.
Yep.
That feels like what I'm doing right now because it's so hot.
I understand. Did you know that I think in like middle Georgia somewhere, they're having, I saw it advertised, like a zombie run.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
If you guys have done a zombie run, let us know.
Yeah, that'd be very curious.
Very cool. And you can let us know on our Facebook group. We plug it every week, and I'm going to keep on doing it. ConnectRunClub.com/Facebook. And we have some fun stuff going on, including our summer challenge, which is happening right now. I'm going to throw it up there. So it's right there. And so this is week 2 of our summer challenge. And you basically run for 20 minutes a day, 3 days a week. For 4 weeks, and so we're on our second week, but each week we give away a prize to anybody that's completed that. So we gave away our first prize on Monday of this week, so a few days ago.
What was that price?
It was just $20 to Amazon. Nice. But if you do all the runs, so if you're joining, you can still get in the weekly prizes. But if you've been tracking along with us, and if you do that for 4 weeks straight, you can win a free pair of running shoes.
That's a beautiful thing right there.
It's a lot of fun. So, and we've got our some fun Olympic stuff happening soon.
So, yeah, we do. I mean, Olympics are 2 weeks away from this coming weekend.
Yeah,
so.
And they're all going to be doping, so it should be a fast one to watch. So.
That's what's humorous to me, that they want to outlaw Russia from coming or something like that. I'm like, look, just ban them all. You're catching the ones who it shouldn't be that way, but you just you're picking.
I heard a really good conversation. It was have you ever listened to Bill Simmons?
On occasions, I have. Yeah,
he has a new show on HBO, and he was talking about. It was Mark Cuban and Malcolm Gladwell.
Yep.
And Gladwell's a huge runner.
Yeah, he is.
And they were talking about what is it, HGOs or whatever they're called, the
human growth, or
just the drugs. And I think Cuban was making the point of like, all this stuff gives you more oxygen in your blood, makes you be able to run better. He's like, so isn't that? So then aren't folks in like Kenya or like Ryan who runs in like high altitude, they're getting the same effect. So he's like, but in some cases they've got the money to get there.
Yeah.
So he's like, are they at a disadvantage too? And then, so it's almost like, at what point is it not genetically modified? And he even talk about like contacts, like folks can see better wearing contacts. So, or LASIK surgery, like at what point? So
yeah, it's interesting.
Let's make them all drugs, and it turns into like the WWE or something, and it's wild or
it could be interesting. That could be
so. That's not our official opinion, but that'd be a fun conversation to have to get some folks on.
That would be.
But that's not what we're talking about this week. We're actually talking about a way that you can improve your running through technology that is legal.
Yes.
And I wonder if any of the folks running in Rio have done this, but it's using a power meter.
Yeah, and this is
you explain what
off the press.
Can you explain what a power meter is now that we've had the conversation?
Not really.
Okay.
And in fact, I don't think Jim Vance could completely explain it. And he gave us some idea, but
well, he knows what it is. He doesn't know how to use it. Right. It's almost like they're testing. So.
Right, because they're still getting information on how to use a power meter as a runner, and now they're just trying to find out, hey, what all is the information we're going to get, and how can we use it as runners? And so the idea is to help us train even more scientifically than we already do. So are there particular paces we need to be training at? Are there particular paces for each run? And I think what's really cool about Run with Power is I think it can give you instant information on how you are becoming more efficient as a runner. I think that at the end of the day, that's what they're hoping to achieve with this. And it is in a very scientific way. So now they're trying to determine, how do we interpret all the data data, and it measures what from hills to the temperature to your pace to everything. Is grading your efficiency with all of that combined. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah. I'm looking at equations right now, but basically when they're talking about power, they're talking about some type of force over some type of distance,
yes,
or in relation to time. And so what's unique about it, because cyclists use this all the time because they have the same distance, because it's the same thing cycling through with their feet. But with running, it's different because folks are going different directions as they run, whether it's a little bit left or a little bit right. And so it's a bunch of different things you can measure. I think one of the examples I heard was like running up a hill. You could be at the same pace, but your power or the amount of work that it takes you to get the hill is going to change depending on how steep that hill is. And so it's almost like another way that you can analyze how you run to figure out ways that you can improve. But yeah, I think the first meters hit the market like November, he was saying, like November of 2015, so not too long ago. But he dives into a lot of great stuff in the conversation as well as in his book. So Run with Power. If you guys have ever used a power meter for biking and you've thought about using it for running, this would be a really good conversation for you.
Yeah, and this is really fascinating. As we talked to Joe Friel last week, Joe was like, oh yeah, Jim is definitely the guy to talk with. And Jim, quite the athlete himself, being a former professional triathlete and quite the runner. I think is a lot for us to learn as runners from his experience in the triathlon world as well. But very interesting topic, running with power.
Yeah, it's a good one. So let's dive into our interview with Mr. Jim Vance.
Well, Jim, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today. Excited to talk with you and excited to kind of dig into your running background a little bit and also to hear about power running. So it was funny. I was talking with Brandon today, and he is of the two of us, he is our resident triathlete. Even though he's only completed one, he's completed more than me. So we were talking about power meters and cycling today. So I'm really curious to see how this operates. So excited digging into this.
Great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. So, hey, can you tell us a little bit about your background? So, I know you ran track and cross country, University of Nebraska, but we'd love to kind of hear your journey into running and your athletic background.
Sure. Well, I was a high school distance runner in Indianapolis, Indiana. Went to Lawrence Central High School. I kind of fell into it from pressure from my dad to stop riding the bench in football and basketball. And so started running, and because my dad knew I had a competitive spirit, and so I kind of got hooked. A little bit of success, and next thing I knew, I was doing pretty well. And I was a 3-time All-State. I didn't even start till probably I went out for track the last few weeks of my sophomore year, and things went pretty well. Sorry about the helicopter there.
No worries. All right.
San Diego is a military town, so we get a lot of that.
Yeah.
And then walked on at the University of Nebraska, was a part of some of their best teams in school history. I think we were 7th at the NCAAs in cross country. I was a top 5 guy for that team. It was interesting when I was there. Our scoring 5 at the Big 12 Conference Championships was 4 full scholarship foreigners. 3 were Kenyans. 1 was an Olympian in the 1500 for Hungary.
Wow.
And then it was me, the walk-on kid from Indiana. That was our scoring 5. Wow. So it was good. And then, after college, I kind of got the bug to keep competing. So moved to San Diego, kind of jumped into triathlon, had a lot of success in that. And, after that, it was I won 2 amateur world titles, went to the Olympic Training Center, was going to try for the Olympics in triathlon. Kind of got sidetracked into Ironman, had a lot of success in that. And after about 5 years of that, I was like, okay, I've had enough, time to retire. so I started writing books and coaching, and teaching was my background. That was my degree. And much of that time, I was actually a school teacher while I was trying to balance all that. So that's kind of my background.
Gotcha. Now, did you have a cycling or swimming background? What kind of piqued your interest about Ironman, about triathlons?
So when I moved to San Diego, I was single and decided, I was living in the Midwest, and it was one of those days where it was just nice and warm out in the middle of January. You couldn't explain it. So I was like, man, life's just better when it's warm and nice out. And so I was like, there's a place where it's like that every day. So I moved to San Diego. And, there's a lot of outdoor stuff here. It's just an outdoor kind of town, and mountains and desert and just lots of cool things. So I started getting into mountain biking, had some success in that. And then naturally started racing some triathletes and some duathlons, off-road duathlons. And they kind of were like, wow, dude, you're pretty talented. You should just learn how to swim. And I was like, well, how far do you have to swim? They said, about 1,500 meters. I was like, heck no, I know how far that is. Yeah. I could drown. And ironically, I'm a tall guy. I'm 6'2", and I was pretty powerful on the bike. And my size, in running was generally my weakness, so to speak, or it was a disadvantage rather, to be that big. But in triathlon, it's a huge advantage. So across the board. So that's kind of how I got into it and kind of found my niche with that. And then I really just started embracing technology. I think, Brandon, you said you'd spoken with Joe Friel, and Joe was one of my coaches and really got me into using technology. And then we just developed a great relationship. We did a book together called Triathlon Science, and I was coaching alongside him for a long time, and it's just kind of exploded from there. So.
Yeah, and I saw an interview of you, I think it was last year, and I love kind of your use for numbers. I think both me and Brandon are both kind of numbers and numbers guys, and love the study of it. And so kind of it was interesting to kind of hear how you would kind of measure athletes, maybe their first mile, measure them again, maybe a little bit of halfway through, and kind of how those paces would translate throughout the race. Did you find yourself using numbers a lot as you race, kind of digging into the numbers part of it and how that will relate to your performance?
Sure. Yeah. I was using data with Friel, power data. I was even into it beforehand, but Friel really got me to see the value of everything. Power numbers on the bike, pace and heart rate. And then, I was always looking for advantages in any sort of technological way I could. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, in triathlon, we have off-road triathlon called Xterra. And one of probably the king of it, we call him the caveman, was a guy named Conrad Stoltz. And geez, I don't know how many times he won the Xterra World Championships, but he was amazing. And I looked around and I said, well, the only way I'm going to beat these guys is if I do something different than what they're doing. So I went and looked at this new concept in mountain biking at the time called 29er wheels. So I grabbed it and ran with it. And Conrad Stoltz was actually making fun of me at one race because I was riding that. And nowadays you go to an Xterra, and if you're riding anything other than a 29er, you're considered to be out of touch. So, I was always looking for an advantage in any way I could. It wasn't even necessarily data and numbers, but any type of technology. So but what you're referring to in terms of pacing actually came from Ironman Hawaii as I was watching the race. Because it's so hard to watch a race that's that long and that deep in abilities, just the talent level. So I started to say, well, let me look at this segment of the race. No one had really looked at it. It was the first mile off the bike. Because, a lot of, for all your runner listeners who don't really understand triathlon or even know about Ironman, it's a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike into a marathon run. So, and this may sound not that crazy to some, or maybe it will. Some of these athletes were coming off the bike and running 5:30 something mile for the first mile off the bike. Now, to give a little bit of context, we're talking about Kona, Hawaii, okay, in the lava fields after spending all day swimming and riding, okay, super dehydrated at this point. You're pretty beat up. And they're starting the marathon run on blacktop and lava rock surrounding them at about noon, 1 o'clock.
Wow!
So, I mean, so it was just a segment of the race that I looked at, and I really wanted to see how are these athletes running. And a lot of them were running their first few miles too fast. they would get too excited and not realizing that it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Right.
So I just wanted to kind of expose that, because I think there some of the athletes that are really broken through an Ironman had looked at the race and dissected the bike and realized the bike was the area that athletes weren't really pushing enough. And now athletes, I think, are pushing so hard on the bike that it's sacrificing the run. Athletes are not really running faster off the bike than they were 20 years ago, which is incredible when you think about it. And I think a lot of that has to do with the lack of pacing execution by many of the best athletes in the world.
If you were going to be so much better in one of those areas, whether it's the swim, whether it's the bike, whether it's the running, is there, if you're an elite athlete, is there an area that you would really want to be the best in? And I don't know, maybe it's you need to be equal across the board, but always wonder, as I looked at some of the guys that they would catch some of the great bikers near the end because they were stronger runners. Is there an area that works out better as an elite athlete to be better at the run or at the swim, at the bike?
Well, I think it depends on which type of triathlon you're looking at. If we look at Ironman, believe it or not, the number one predictor for performance is total time to transition to.
Wow.
Swim your bike. So if you're swim your bike, that's number one predictor for performance. Yeah. So you still have to be a great swimmer rider, and my research actually showed you don't even have to be the best runner. You just have to execute the best, and you've got a chance to really beat a lot of guys that are better than you. I mean, that's really all fitness is. Fitness just gives us a larger margin of error to work with in our racing. So that's in Ironman, I think it's a little bit different. In triathlon, in the Olympics, or what we call ITU, which stands for International Triathlon Union, which a lot of your listeners and podcast viewers will watch this summer in Rio, you have to be a great runner. You have to be. Gwen Jorgensen is running, low 34 minutes off the bike for women. She'll probably run in the 33s here for 10K. The men in the Olympics in London went, I think all three medalists were sub 30 minutes off the bike for a 10K. And they're almost 90 minutes into the race before they start the 10K. So it gives you an idea of how fast they're going. I want to say the first 5K last year for the Brownlee brothers and Javier Gomez, or not last year, but the last Olympics, as I was watching it, was somewhere around 14:40 for the first 5K off the bike. So, you're talking running 4:41 pace right there. So it's an entirely different type of race. I do not expect the Rio Olympics to have that fast of a run this year because there's a major hill in the course that the athletes will have to cover basically 16 times. There's 8 laps, and they got to go up it, over the other side, and then come around and back up it and down it again. So, and it's going to be very hot compared to what London was. So do I think they'll break 30? I mean, it's possible. I mean, we just keep getting faster. I think I wouldn't be surprised in a few years if the best guys in the world are running sub 29 minutes off the bike.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
Do you see, you mentioned some of the elite athletes coming very, very quick off of the bike. Do you see the same thing happen with some of the age groupers and middle of the packers as well? Do they have a tendency? Is it a natural tendency to come fast off the bike, or is that more an elite runner type thing?
Oh, I think you mean in terms of pacing ability?
In terms of pacing, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
No, pacing is the hardest skill to learn of any athlete. And the fact that, it takes courage to pace yourself. You have to be courageous, and I think so many athletes just fall into the peer pressure. I can't let these athletes go. I don't have the confidence to know that I'm within my zone and I can come back. Yeah. In fact, that's one of the biggest things I do with, I coach a junior program that I started here for triathlon, which works in draft legal racing, which is like the Olympics. And so my kids run anywhere from 2.5K off the bike for our 13 to 15 year olds, or they run 5K off the bike for my 16 to 19 year olds. And they run, I always have them break it into thirds. I say the first third we control, we stay in control, or contact, control or contact, whichever word they like better. where we let everyone kind of go, but we keep them in contact. We stay within control of ourselves and realize, no, we're not going to blow it in the first third. And then the second third we build. So on the 5K, it's easily, you just break it up into 3 miles. In the 2.5K, you break it up into half miles. The first third is control or contact. The second third is build, where we increase the pace. So anybody we kind of let go, we try to catch them in the middle third, and then the last third we go. So it's contact or control, whichever word they like, followed by build, and the last third is go, just everything you got left. And it's amazing how well athletes tend to pace themselves with that strategy.
I love that strategy. Would you suggest something similar to that in a just as us athletes who are looking to do a 10K, half marathon? Is it the same kind of mindset you think we should take in doing those races as well?
I think it certainly is something to consider and to try. Mm-hmm. I think athletes need to try that more so in their workouts. That because so many athletes start their workouts too hard and they end up going into such oxygen debt or beating themselves up so bad that they're not really achieving the goals of their workout that they want, so that they can learn better pacing. But in triathlon, it can be different too, because you're coming off the bike with different athletes who have different strengths. So you kind of have to understand, how good of a runner am I relative to these athletes? Usually if someone's a better runner than you in the start of the race, it and they're gone.
Right.
So it's and you have the opportunity in triathlon to potentially not work as hard in junior racing because of the drafting ability on the bike. So now in Ironman, that's not the case necessarily, but I do think, athletes definitely want to be able to understand pacing a lot better. And I think athletes runners always came into a run workout thinking, I'm gonna care more about being my fastest towards the end of the workout, the later intervals, then the chances are they're going to be a lot more successful, not just in training but in racing too.
Now, I know this is an easy setup question for you, but I do truly want to know. I've got a good friend of mine who he was probably running 4 or 5 marathons a year, and he's in really good condition, but he has recently, in the last 12 months, kind of started doing Ironman. He did a half Ironman in Chattanooga the other day, and he looks better than he ever has. He's running less mileage than he ever has, but he's also faster. Talk to us about your transition and how it helped you become a better runner, and why does that happen? I'm really curious, because this is fascinating to me to watch him. His times are going down, even though his mileage is going down as well. So it's fascinating to me to watch his transition.
Sure. Believe it or not, Gwen Jorgensen, who's probably the gold medal favorite in Rio, she ran at the University of Wisconsin. She was not into triathlon. She was also a swimmer there. And USA Triathlon got her in a program called the Collegiate Recruitment Program out of college and convinced her to come back and out of just to jump into triathlon and leave the corporate world and really give it a try. Mm-hmm. She's actually running faster now than she ever did in college, with a triathlon focus. And what we're finding is that's actually the case for a majority of those athletes in that program who have come out of it. There are a lot of reasons for that. I think the biggest reason is that you can only work your aerobic system so long as a runner. You just can't. The pounding of running is just only so much. The injury risk is just exponential. But you can go for a long bike ride. Go out and do a 3-hour run, and it's going to take you a heck of a lot longer to, quite a long time to recover from that. Go out and do a 5-hour bike ride. You can come back and do another 5-hour bike ride the next day, no problem. So certainly you have that ability to expand your aerobic system beyond ways that you've ever really done it. Another way, I think, I obviously don't know the athlete you're referring to, but I know for me with triathlon, I actually began running a lot faster too later in my career than I ever did at Nebraska, at least for my longer distances. Obviously I wasn't running 1,500 on the track and things in triathlon, or especially in Ironman, but I was just much leaner because I was working out so much more. I was able to keep, just a much lower body fat. So I was actually more efficient with every step that I took. So I think that, it's chances are it's a combination of those types of things, generally speaking, with athletes. But, injury risk, the ability to stimulate the system with less injury risk, because now you're using a bicycle, you're using the water rather than only relying on pounding from running.
Now, can you talk to us a little? I would love to talk a little bit about about running with power, but wanted to understand first kind of the power meter from a cycling standpoint for those of us who don't cycle much. Could you kind of dig into kind of where all of that came from and exactly help us understand kind of what the power meter is from a cycling standpoint?
Sure. So a power meter on a bicycle just generally has strain gauges of some type that measure the force you apply to the bike or through the pedals, and the speed at which you apply that force. That's what power is. So power is just force times speed. So, a strain gauge on like a crank arm of a bicycle will measure the force that's applied, and then obviously the cadence, how fast you're spinning the pedals, gives you your watts. So watts is really just a work rate. Power is. So the fitter you are in general, the higher the work rate you can hold, and the longer you can hold it. So that would be either the force you can apply is greater for longer or at a higher speed. So these are all kind of it's variable, but that's the basic premise. Now, on a bicycle, any watt I get is a great watt. I mean, the power meter on my bicycle that tells me my watts tells me, okay, these are the watts that are moving the bike, and these are all good watts because that's what I want. In running, we don't have that, and this is where it gets a little complex. Not every watt in running is a good watt. So it's not really about total watts. It's about speed per watt. How fast do you run for the watts that you produce? As much as power is an incredible metric in cycling, it's changed everything. A lot of people think that power is going to be the most important metric in running, and I don't believe that's the case. I think pace is still the most important thing. We don't care about watts. We care about who is fastest. That's running. Yeah. But what I think power does is it greatly enhances pace as a metric, because now you understand the work rate required to produce that pace. So if an athlete can work at can have a smaller work rate for a given pace, that's a big improvement. So, or the ability to hold a higher work rate despite whatever pace they're running is important. So it becomes more of an efficiency metric. So that's why I created in my book Run with Power. I created a metric called efficiency index, which gives athletes that speed per watt. And what it does, it measures the watts or the speed actually of an athlete in meters per minute divided by the watts. So you could take a whole run and say, well, the pace of this run was, for simple math, let's say an athlete runs 8-minute mile pace for a run, and they do it at 200 watts. Well, that's basically, you've got 200 watts a minute, or 200 meters in a minute. Mm-hmm. So divided by 200 watts, that's 1.0. So that athlete would have an efficiency index of 1.0. Okay. So, and then the ability, what it actually allows athletes to do is I call it index, because they can index themselves at certain intensities. So if I go out and train at a 10K intensity, what I think is a 10K intensity, can I actually, am I seeing that efficiency index at that intensity improve my speed per watt? Even if, maybe my efficiency index isn't improving, it's staying the same. But if I'm actually holding the same efficiency index at a higher speed, well, that's great too. I know that I'm responding to my training. So that's a general way of describing power for running.
Is one advantage of it, is it easy to kind of track how you're improving as a runner? Because I think that is always the one difficulty for me, but using heart rate training is that, man, your heart rate can change from day to day, and it's hard to tell. Does this kind of help you be able to kind of track, hey, this is where I was 4 weeks ago or 6 weeks ago? Is it easier to track maybe how you're improving as an athlete?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because power is going to be always objective with itself. I can go out and run. I can go out and run on a windy day, and I can have a tailwind. But if I'm applying a force into a ground that's a little bit lighter, then and I'm still like, I'll be able to tell, like, okay, this was, yes, I was fast, but really I wasn't working that hard because my watts were lower. You can also have varied courses. I mean, if you travel a lot and you're constantly running on different courses, it's hard. One day you might run a hilly course, next day, a downhill course, next day a flat course. It's hard to say. It's hard to use pace in that sense to really gauge intensity. It's hard to gauge intensity based even with heart rate in those types of situations. It's also difficult to use either of those in an interval workout. Especially if you're on a track. So I think pace and heart rate. The variance we see in those relative to outside factors, heat, hydration, stress levels, everything, motivation. Power certainly is a much more objective measurement in that sense.
That's great. Brendan, any questions from your end on the?
Yeah. So on the power side of things, is it that ability to see the changes regardless of the external, like the wind or the course? Like if folks are looking at this, like I've done heart rate training, I've done pace training. What would you say just to like a beginner kind of getting into it? Like this is the data you're going to get that you can't get using anything else.
Well, if they're a beginner wanting to get into it, first thing I'd say is buy my book and read it.
Yeah.
Run with Power.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it's really, and I'll be honest, guys. So when VeloPress came to me with this book idea, they knew that it was new technology.
Yeah.
I mean, these weren't even on the market yet, and they wanted me to write a book on it. I'm like, okay, well, I've got some learning to do. So I went and I think the book was due to VeloPress December 1, and I didn't get my first power meter from a company called Stride until almost October.
Okay.
So I was like, guys, I need a little more time here. This is, I just got it.
I need to do some testing.
So there's still, even though I've written this book, in the book, I'm very honest and open that what we can learn, we still don't even know.
Gotcha.
I have athletes come to me a lot. Hey, what do you see in this? Well, tell me everything. And I'm like, at this point in time, I think the data is still so new,
right,
that athletes should collect it
just to see.
Just collect it and not really drive their training and their racing based upon power numbers, but do it as they normally would. And then go back and review and see, okay, wow, here's how power responded. Here was the data according to my training that power gives me. And I think athletes will learn a lot more about themselves. I think they'll learn a lot more about their tendencies. I think they'll see maybe where they overreached in training, because it's going to give you a new way to measure training intensity and training stress load.
Gotcha. That
pace can't give you, that heart rate can't give you. So it's an incredibly exciting time, because we don't even know what all we're going to learn in the years ahead. But some of the basic things, I think, is really looking at speed per watt. I think that's the number one concept in power. How efficient of a runner are you?
Yeah.
And one thing that I didn't really mention in the previous question was, I said that not every watt is a good watt, and it's probably important that I explain that. On a bicycle, like I said, I just push the pedal down and spin the pedals, and the bike notes that, the power meter tells me on the head unit, like my Garmin or something, hey, you're doing this. This is great. Here's the number you got. In running, we actually have three planes of power. We have a horizontal plane, So movements back and forth, work that I conduct, a work rate forward and back. We have vertical, up and down, and then we have lateral, left and right. Now, the smallest of those is lateral. When would you have lateral power? Well, you would have lateral power on a turn, like on a road course when you're doing a road race as a runner, or on a track. An indoor track is probably going to have tighter turns. You're going to have a lot more lateral power where you're pressing laterally. In vertical power is up and down. So when do I have a lot of up and down power or low? Well, that would be when I'm running uphill. I need a lot more vertical power. Okay. Horizontal power is generally when I'm running on the flat. How am I translating into forward movement? Because work is just force times distance. Apply a force, move a distance. So power is a work rate. How fast am I working, basically? So if I just stand here and I jump up and down, if I get out of my chair here and I just jump up and down, I'm going to have very high vertical power, but I'm not going anywhere. So my speed is 0. So I have very high watts, but I have 0 speed. Not very effective.
Right.
So that's why you really want to look at speed per watt. And courses are going to matter because yes, you're going to have vertical power when you go uphill. You're probably going to have, when you go downhill too, it's going to depend on the uphill, downhill. I won't get into all that part, but I think most people understand the basics of that. So how you actually run, the course that you run on is going to determine basically what's an effective watt and what isn't. Athletes with high vertical oscillation, so really bouncing strides up and down, they're going to have higher vertical power, and their goal might be, well, I want to reduce my vertical power and translate a lot more of that into horizontal power. So that's where I can have 2 athletes that are running, and I give examples of this in the book, that are running at the exact same wattage and they're the exact same size and they're running at completely different speeds.
Wow.
So how you mentioned sensors, you mentioned stride. So is that an accelerometer? Like, how is that actually working? How's it measuring the power?
Sure. So there's two main power meter companies on the market right now. Stride is one that's a sensor that you wear on your chest.
Okay.
And it has a number of accelerometers in it that measure movements because it's at the core of your body, and it also it connects with a heart rate monitor strap. Okay. So, in fact, most people, if they saw you, think you're just wearing a heart rate monitor. They don't realize that the stride unit is right there in the middle of it, too.
Gotcha.
As a power meter. So, all it knows is once you enter your mass, it knows, okay, you're a certain amount of mass. You went a certain distance. Okay, well, then it must have required a certain force.
Right.
It can calculate that, and they've done 3D motion sensor testing, and they've done some power, some force plate treadmill testing to make sure that their numbers were accurate, and it's pretty impressive. The other product is RPM squared, which is an insole based power meter that has sensors in it that just you press on it and it knows. So measures the force directly, and it also doubles as a bike power meter for cyclists. So and it even does some other things. It has accelerometers in it, can measure functional testing like flexibility and range of motion and some other things. They do a lot of even how you stand. It'll tell you how your foot actually lands.
Yeah.
So it's impressive. I do expect there to be some more companies though to come out with power meters. Probably some sensors more so based on the shoe.
Gotcha.
Maybe on the outside of it. There's a couple of companies right now that I think are on the verge of that. RunScribe is one, and I think another company out of Portugal called Kinematics.
Gotcha. That's real cool. So you said you got your sensor, was it in November that you've been testing with your
October, right around October, yeah.
Is that a 2015?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
Have there been things that you've noticed that have surprised you after kind of looking back at your data?
Sure. Well, actually, I was kind of injured, so I wasn't running much. Okay. that was the bummer. I'm back running now, thankfully. But yeah, I mean, I thought watt per kilogram was going to be a big thing. And yes, it plays a role, but in cycling, it's all about watt per kilo. It's all about watt per kilo. What's the watts you can produce relative to your body mass?
Yeah.
And in running, it's not. Athletes with the same watt per kilo can run in entirely different speeds. Athletes the same size at the same watt per kilo, can run at different speeds. So, yeah, really, it was really just getting myself off the whole more watts is better.
Gotcha.
Thing, and really understanding that there's an efficiency to the way we run. This is an efficiency tool. So that was the biggest thing. Seeing that, and in the book I give a lot of examples of that. Some testing. I'd say one of the interesting things too was that in cycling, as I get tired, my watts go down on the bike because I'm fatiguing. I can't produce the same force. I can't spin the pedals as fast. In running, I actually found that athletes, as they tire, their watts go up, but their speed per watt goes down.
Yeah.
So they're running very inefficiently. So they might do a lot more vertical oscillation, or they might try to stride out longer and try to put more force into the ground and just different things. But yeah, or they might have more lateral movements, more lateral power as they fatigue. So it's the opposite of what we see in cycling. But of course, there's a limit to that. It's not infinite, but certainly that was a huge surprise to me.
That's cool. So, are there any places that you would direct folks, in addition to your book, which we'll definitely link in the show notes, for people that want to learn more about running with power?
Well, sure. I think if they look at the companies, Stride and RPM Squared, those two, they can kind of look and use them. I know they have Stride.com as a forum. Stride is STRYD. RPM Squared is just RPM2.com. My website, CoachVance.com. I do a lot of writing and just different things with that. But those are probably the top areas, and I think obviously the book is pretty good at giving athletes a lot of basic info.
Yeah.
My teaching background is really, I think, one of the things that people really like about my writing style. I take complex things and walk people through them. So I think so far reception of the books have been great.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we look forward to reading more about it.
Absolutely.
And following more of your journeys and your power tracking. But thanks for hanging out with us and joining us on the podcast today.
Okay, thanks guys. Thanks for having me. Good luck.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Jim.
Thank you.